episode of On the Sofa. We're having some technical fun this evening, so apologies for being a little bit late, but we're here now and hopefully it might work. Who knows? It all adds to the excitement. So my name's Anna, and tonight we're here to discuss the ins and outs of researching your roots. Our focus in March has been all about family, and so many of our customers come to us with questions about tartans and what name should wear which tartan. So we wanted to take it back a step and finding out, first of all, who your ancestors are. So Adam is with me tonight from our marketing team, and he's been our guinea pig for demonstrating just what this kind of research can uncover when done properly and how you can start your own journey.
Indeed. So, have you ever wondered where you come from and what stories lie in your family history? I've actually lived in Berwick-upon-Tweed all my life, which sits on the border between England and Scotland. In fact, it has changed hands 13 times throughout history. So I was intrigued to find out if there were some Scottish connections within my lineage. We're delighted to have Ian Walker from Borders Journeys joining us this evening to explain his side of the business, which is Ancestry research. Ian also offers a unique service to visitors with guided sightseeing, ancestral and even outlander tours across Scotland, and his knowledge of the country is quite incredible, which we're about to find out.
So now I'm hoping to welcome Ian. We're having a few technical problems, as I say. Oh, here we go. So we're having a few technical issues, and I think we might have Ian in voice only this evening because for some reason his camera is refusing to work. So Ian, are you with us?
I'm still here, yes.
Oh, fabulous. Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us, and apologies, our system misbehaving this evening. So, shall we get started? And as I mentioned, our theme for March has been family. So, Ian, do you want to share with us what family means to you and a little bit about your own family history?
Well, family is very important because it gives you that obvious connection. And very close to my family, and it was actually my grandfather, that he loved nothing better than having his family all around him. So there was my father, his siblings, in-laws, and all the grandchildren. I was the oldest grandchild, so I spent the longest time and most time with my grandpa. So it was through him that I've become so absorbed in family life, but also the interest in family history also.
And is that then what led you on to start Border Journeys? Was that your inspiration and your interest in the ancestry side?
It was, because I was a career civil servant for 26 years and decided, I got to a point in life where I thought, actually, I'm going to do a job that I want to do rather than feel I have to do. So I left the civil service and set up Borders Journeys. Initially, Borders Journeys was going to be tours only. However, it became apparent quite quickly that a lot of my clients were visiting Scotland because of their interest in their own ancestry. And with my knowledge of ancestral research, I decided it was maybe a good way to combine the research for clients. And then when they decided to visit, they were going to do a general tour of Scotland, but also build in their ancestral heritage also. So me doing the ancestral research for the client and then taking them on that journey to walk in the footsteps of their ancestors, it almost became like a "Who do you think you are?"
Our favourite programme.
Yes, exactly.
Well, we do have a story actually, because we did, from Who Do You Think We Are, years ago, we did dress Fiona Bruce for the front cover of the Radio Times. I don't know if we even have a Radio Times anymore, but yeah, we should have had a picture of that. We'll find one to send you, Ian, because it's quite funny. That was quite a long time ago. And here we are doing our very own Who Do You Think You Are show. So
yes, so
Adam,
moving on to my research, I've actually loved being the so-called guinea pig, which Hannah referred to me as. But I didn't actually know before I started the research that Rutherford was a sect of Clan Douglas. So I'm just wondering if you could tell our listeners a bit more about the process and how they could get started on their own ancestral research.
Well, use the guinea pig example, Adam.
Yeah.
When we first spoke about doing the ancestral research for you, the first thing I said to you and gave you was your homework.
Indeed.
I set you homework before I could even start your ancestral research. Because basically, what I need is as much information from you and what you know or your parents and grandparents know about the family. So if you can tell me about modern day, going back to your grandparents' time, it's easier for me then to pick up the trail and go further back. And speaking to your grandparents, you came back to me with details of obviously them, but also your great grandparents' names.
Yeah.
And with these names, I was able to, first of all, look at the Victorian censuses and then take it from there and start researching and uncovering your family heritage. So it's basically the first thing that if anybody comes to me and says, how do I start? Speak to your relatives. If you do talk to them, and if you don't talk to them, introduce yourself. But the key thing is to get as much information, because you never know. Some cousin, aunt, uncle may have dabbled and done a wee bit research already, and that helps you, it helps me to then start tracing your ancestry.
So I think that so-called homework stage of the process is obviously very important to you leading into your deeper research.
Yes, absolutely.
Great.
Because without information from you, it makes it very difficult for me to start, because it's really starting at scratch. Whereas if you can tell me one or two generations, then it's easier to pick up the line from there.
And so what kind of useful sources then, if we use, for example, I've already done a bit of family tree on Ancestry, the kind of classic place to start your family tree. But then I've got really quite stuck. So what's your, what do you offer me then that, so you found out loads of stuff for Adam that he really didn't know.
Yeah.
So what's your magic sources that help in that process?
Talking from a Scottish perspective here, the Scottish records are singly the best records in the world when it comes to doing ancestral research. They're so rich in the information because, for example, on birth certificate in England, it gives basic details, whereas on a Scottish birth certificate, it gives the father's name, occupation, the mother's maiden name, and if they were married, where they were married. And that's important because that gives you then a link back. On a marriage certificate in England, it only gives the father's name. There's no mention of a mother on a marriage certificate for a couple. Whereas in Scotland, you have the father and the mother's maiden name. So again, that's already giving you a clue to a previous generation. So the information is really, really fantastic on Scottish certificates. And on a death certificate in Scotland, it gives the name of the person who died, if they were married, what their partner's name was, whether they're still alive, but also it gives details of the parents. So the Scottish certificates have that extra information that's not available on English certificates. And in Scotland, again, you can pay to a subscription to Scotland's People, and there you can go in and you can check the indexes, and you can actually call up death certificates over 50 years, a marriage certificate over 75 years, and a birth certificate over 100 years. So you can actually see these online, as well as the censuses from 1841 right up to 1911.
Wow.
So there's a rich amount of information there online. You can also, there's a lot of family history societies have indexed local cemeteries, church records. So there's a whole plethora of information available. But for me, I know where to go and look quickly.
You're the expert.
Yes, if you've done it often, you know exactly where to go, and you can actually solve a lot of people's ancestral problems very quickly.
Mhm. And so, I don't know a huge amount about this. So it's something like Scotland's People. Then that you don't need a qualification or be like an expert like yourself to sign up for that. I could have a membership to Scotland's People. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. All you do is simply register and pay a search fee. You can look at the indexes for free, but then you have to pay for access to look at the certificates.
Yeah.
Whereas in the English system, or I should say England and Wales system, you look up the indexes, you see the certificate, but then you've got to order it to be posted to you, or in some circumstances they can email it to you, but you have to wait on that certificate coming. Whereas in Scotland, you can tap on it, it comes up. Oh, it's the wrong one. You can look up another one. So, but yes, anybody can go on to Scotland's People. All you do is register.
And we have lots of customers who have Irish backgrounds as well. So is it the same for Ireland? Are there good records in Ireland as well, or how does it work there?
If I get an inquiry for someone in Ireland, I pass it on to an expert in that field.
Okay.
There are a lot of records available for Irish research online, but again, I would pass that on because that's not my area of expertise. Yeah. My area of expertise is obviously Scotland, but I do research in England also.
So, Ian, I just wanted to ask you quickly about the differences you've spoke about the Scottish and the English side of things with marriage and death certificates and the differences that you see on these types of documents. How much did that influence when you were doing my research? Because there was obviously a lot of English and Scottish sides of my ancestry.
The Scottish side was easier because the certificates were available online.
Yeah.
However, doing the research for the English side meant that I had to think, yeah, I'm almost 100% sure that is the person, and then go ahead and order the certificate. But then I had to wait a week for that certificate to come back. And if that certificate had been wrong, and there was a second choice, we would then have waited another week for that certificate to come back. So the Scottish system, the fact that you can see the certificates online is fantastic. And with your research, Adam, I was able to take it further back in Scotland because we had the mothers. For example, we had your 4 times great-grandfather, Alexander Rutherford.
Yeah.
Now, Alexander Rutherford's wife was, from memory, Margaret Watson.
Yeah.
Now, there was an A. Rutherford and a Margaret Watson. But then from another certificate, it had the Margaret H. Watson. So I had an Alexander Rutherford and a Margaret Watson, but it was that middle H on the certificate, her middle name, that really clinched the fact that I could take that further on. And my hunch was correct. The H was for Hunter. And that took us on from that certificate. So again, the certificates are only as good as the information that your ancestor put on them.
Yeah, and it's these fine details that kind of make the difference when you're doing the research, I guess.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's in Scotland, up until really the tradition sort of fell away after World War II. The first son to a marriage was always named after the father's father. The second son to a marriage was named after the mother's father. But what was unique was his middle name was the mother's maiden name. So it was the father's full name. The first daughter born to a marriage was named after the mother's mother. So it was the mother's mother's first name, and her own maiden name formed the middle name. And the second daughter was named after the father's mother. So again, if you looked at a family of children, you could really start to pick out who the grandparents were and the next generation back.
Yeah.
So we've got the certificates, plus we've got this naming tradition, and then subsequent children, they tended to be named after great grandparents, possibly. So looking at the whole hierarchy of a family, you could start to pick out the names of grandparents and potentially great grandparents.
Great.
Yeah,
Interesting.
it's interesting. So Adam discovered some interesting stories, didn't he? Do you want to
He
tell
did.
us? Tell us then about that one.
Well,
Yeah.
do you want to go ahead, Adam, and first?
Yeah, well, I think the main standout story from the research that you provided was that of David Rutherford, and actually there was a warrant for his arrest. So maybe you could expand on that and a bit of the background story, and maybe we could decide if we think he was guilty or not.
Well, I was going through the research, and I was going through certain records, and suddenly when I was going through the indexes, this criminal record came up, and I thought, surely Adam's not got criminals in his family past. And then it was Adam Rutherford. Sorry, Adam, slip there. David Rutherford. David Rutherford. And I thought, now, could that be him? And then I checked the address. Whoops, it's the same address. And it was a case of he had returned from work. He'd demanded dinner from his wife. There was no food in the house. And there was a bit of a fracas. He stormed out, and his wife, Margaret, was left feeling rather unwell. And her mother came. This is all going from the criminal record, and then I looked at the newspapers of the day, that the Berwickshire Advertiser, and found whole transcript of what actually happened right through the trial. And sadly, Margaret died. David was taken into custody. There was a trial, but he was actually acquitted of manslaughter. So he was freed. He eventually married again. And what was interesting was that David died relatively young, at 44. And again, 44, maybe back in 1891, was considered well into middle age. And he died in the poorhouse in Berwick. Now, a lot of people think someone who died in the poorhouse was potentially a pauper, unemployed, ill, unable to work. It doesn't actually indicate on David's death certificate whether he was in the actual poorhouse or the poorhouse hospital, but it does show that he died from pneumonia. Now, back in 1891, obviously there wasn't a National Health Service, so potentially David could have still been employed, still an income, but unable to afford to pay for medical treatment. So the only free medical treatment that was available was in the poorhouse. So that's maybe why he was in the poorhouse. So he's had a rather interesting life, David Rutherford, from being born in Scotland, becoming a miner in Northumberland, to being in jail, being acquitted for manslaughter, and eventually dying in the poorhouse. So that's the sort of information you can find. Okay, you're not going to find it in an hour. It does take several days to uncover all that information, looking through various records. But it's actually amazing what you can actually pick out for ancestors.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I love the bit about, because there were lots of different employment sectors, weren't there, in your family, and there was a bit about, was it Charles, who was from 1782, I think he was born, and he was a dyer. That was his profession. So here you are all these years later working for a textiles company, Adam. So it was obviously meant to be.
Yeah, it's actually, you see, going through some families, there's they can go through their entire life doing one occupation. But then you look at such as, David, no, not David, his father, Alexander. He started off life in a brickworks. He became a coal miner and then a rope maker. So they're quite different jobs. And the only problem sometimes with the census is it gives you that 10-year snapshot of life. So that one enumerator night, census night, every 10 years. But then you wonder what happens in that 10 years in between. What led Alexander in 1841 census, working at brickworks, to 10 years later, he was in Northumberland, living in England now, and a coal miner. What took him from the brickworks to the mines?
Yes, you end up with more questions than answers.
Yeah, and the thing is, as an ancestral researcher, suddenly it becomes I almost adopt the family of my client. And in as much as I have to keep thinking, this is not my family, I've got to stop. But then I think, I want to know what happened there. And you just do that wee bit more research, and you think, I've got to solve this. I've got to find out. And exactly what happened when I was doing your found that David was in prison. I had to find out what the end result was, and what happened, what the background information was that led to him being taken in for attempted murder or manslaughter. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I think it certainly would have been like the talk of the town at the time. It certainly came as a surprise when you gave me the results of my research. I'm just wondering, how does that compare to any other stories that you've come across in other research that you've done? Is there any other obscure stories that you've got to tell?
There's so many. I've had people who believed that they had the right to a family crest and they had the tableware that belonged it, but what did I found out in the past? An ancestor had actually bought the silverware at an auction, and
oh no.
It's you find, I've never actually had one with as grisly a tale as yours, Adam. Yours will go down as the grisliest tale that I've researched. But some people's families, it's a strange one because they've been here, they've lived, they've had a good life, but it's been a simple life, no stories or anything. That it's almost like they've been here and they've just gone about their business quietly. But David Rutherford did make a good mark for himself.
Good story for you.
I feel like that's why it came as such as a surprise to me. I don't think anything like that will ever happen again in my family line. So,
well,
touch wood.
The thing is, if you watch such as Who Do You Think You Are, you see the celebrities, and they're surprised at what happened 2-3 generations back, because again, it's out with living memory. And if you think about David, again, that was 1874. That's only 150 years ago. Just under 150 years ago. But again, probably if you'd asked if your great-grandfather or great-great-grandfather had been around, they would have known that there was some story about an ancestor who'd been in prison, but probably not known who. But as you say, Adam, it would probably be the scandal of Berwick.
Yes. Yeah.
And you're lucky the Rutherfords are still allowed to live in Berwick after that.
Got myself lucky.
And I was intrigued then because there's the wee village called Rutherford near Kelso. So is that linked? Is that
there will be a link? Oh, way back in the paperwork that the history of the Rutherfords that I found online. It does mention that the fact that the Rutherfords did settle there. It appears that the Rutherfords came across at the time of the Normans arriving in England. Now, over the years, I've researched about when and how did surnames begin in Scotland. Up until the Normans arrived in Scotland at the invitation of King David I, the Scots didn't have a surname. You're simply known by your first name. And if you had a family of a few, for example, Adams, you'd have Big Adam, you'd have Wee Adam, you'd have Red Adam because he had red hair. You would have Cobbler Adam because he was a cobbler by birth. You'd have Baker Adam. So people were known by the first name and a nickname. And it wasn't until the Normans arrived here that brought their tradition of surnames to Scotland. And the first surname that's been recorded in Scotland really is during the reign of King David I, 1124 to 1153. And again, people started to develop their names, and the names could come from occupations, from place names. Clans started to adopt names from their clan chiefs. So you would have MacDonald, which was son of Donald. Mm-hmm. Or you could have Donald's son, which is the anglicized version of MacDonald. So Mac means son of. So MacDonald, son of Donald, or Donald son. And another thing was the development of the surnames in Ireland, because you've got the Mix and the Macs. So you've got MC, which tended to be Irish Gaelic, and you had MEC, which was Scottish Gaelic. They meant exactly the same, son of. But then you had the movement between Scotland and Ireland and Scotland. So some Macs became Mix, some Mix became Macs, and the Macs and the Mix all got mixed up.
Yeah.
And of course, people were illiterate, and they really didn't know whether they were a Mac or a Mick or a Mick or a Mac. So that's really where the surnames came about. But again, going back to your research, Adam, it was interesting the fact that with Berwick being as close to the border, and as you mentioned, it changed hands between England and Scotland so many times over the centuries, there was bound to be that movement of people. As the border moved back and forward, people would move back and forward. But then with the fact that it's a fluid border, right up to modern days, there's movement either side of the border. And you'll see as close as your, I'm just trying to remind myself, your grandmother is a MacLeod.
Yeah.
Was born MacLeod. And your great grandmother was born a Lothian. Her surname was Lothian. And she was born in Scotland. So you've got that mixture of English and Scottish blood, but Rutherford itself, as you know, is Scottish.
Yeah, there you go. Very interesting. I actually class myself as English, but from the family history, it could go either way, I think.
It wouldn't be bad if you classed yourself as Scottish.
I think working for who you're working for, you might have to move allegiance. I think that's so interesting, Ian. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I've learned even more, so we've really enjoyed Adam's journey.
I think so, and I hope the customers that have tuned in have learned a lot from you as well, and what they can expect from Paula's journeys.
Yeah, we'll pop some links up on the online as well, just so that people can reach you as well, Ian, if they've got more questions, if that's okay.
Perfect. Anybody who wants to contact me if they've got any questions or just looking pointed in a certain direction with the research.
Yeah. So interesting, as Adam's discovered. So next week's episode of On the Sofa is one not to be missed because it's National Tartan Day. So one of our favourite days of the year. Unfortunately, we won't be marching down 6th Avenue this year, but we will be doing things virtually, and we're going to discuss all things the Declaration of Arbroath, worldwide tartan celebrations, and how you can celebrate from home. And we've even got our own New York City Tartan Week box filled with tartan goodies if you need a hand with those at-home celebrations. So we look forward to seeing you next Wednesday at 7 o'clock.
Great.
And thank
See
you
guys
Ian.
then.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care.